method of understanding people's experiences through their own interpretation and trying to figure out why and how people do things from their own perspective, not from simply some kind of outside perspective that might see ourselves as above others, or that they're trapped in their weird beliefs. Try and figure out their beliefs. One of the best quotes that always sticks with me about field work is by a professor that I had the privilege of working with. And this is where Amy says, "I knew it, it's an extension of that Latin America class." Sidney Mintz was one of the first anthropologists to go to a place that wasn't extremely far away in terms of its kind of cultural out there-ness. So it wasn't the Trobriand Islands, it wasn't the Kwakiutl of the Northwest Coast, it wasn't the Balinese. It was when Puerto Rico was was transitioning to become a colony of the United States. And he went there. He gets described later on page 88 in Guest. He went there originally with a team of field workers, and they wrote together a book called The People of Puerto Rico. And it was in some ways a pretty landmark difference from what other anthropologists had done. So what Mintz wrote about was what he called a traditional anthropological catechism. Well, all big syllable words. You probably know what traditional means, and anthropological, we're finding out. Catechism. Anybody have to go through catechism? That's kind of a Catholic word. We'll say it's a belief. It's a traditional anthropological belief or a creed that you go through. And his creed went like this: study what you can see and hear, record everything you can. So basically, you go there and you try to get everything you can recorded in some way. Maybe it's tape recorded, maybe it's filmed, maybe it's pictures. Field notes are the most traditional method. Do not expect it to be entirely consistent. It's just wonderful at sort of going and talking to people and then trying to figure out, how individuals and different people thought about the world. And this is something that, when you come back from the field and you're trying to figure out how to write these things up, there's going to be a lot of things that are not entirely consistent. And you have to, because people aren't consistent, and that's an important section of field work. Listen. I've made this word bigger because I think it may be the most important part of doing anthropological fieldwork, is to really listen, to really try and figure out what people are saying and expressing, or when you're with them. In the case of Mintz, he actually was working with people. He then wrote a life history of Tasso, a person who was working in the sugarcane plantations as they were being taken over by the United States. Listen. Count the ancillary blessings of discomfort. Ancillary, the additional, the added on blessings of being being out of your comfort zone. Alex, how might we be out of our comfort zone? What's that called when we go into another place and all of a sudden culture shock, and then you get used to that place and you come back and you might experience reverse culture shock, or you become so, and that speaks to us of how we can learn to be comfortable perhaps in a different place, and then to the extent that when we return, our own place can feel uncomfortable. Mintz would later go on to write, his most famous book is called Sweetness and Power, The Place of Sugar in Modern History, which describes in the way in which sugar went from being a high-end luxury commodity that only the richest could afford to being a necessity of the working class in order to make things sweeter and provide more calories. If those items in the catechism, system of belief, or creed do not add up to a methodology for other sterner disciplines, so be it. Who are those sterner disciplines, you think, Amy? What's a sterner discipline out there? You said you were surprised to find out that fieldwork was a science and an art. Yeah, when you usually refer to sterner disciplines, it's those people who try to be all serious and scientific and think they're doing science. And Smith says, if just going there and being with people and listening to them doesn't add up to much for those people who want to think of themselves as scientists, who cares? We're doing some art here as well. They have, I believe, nonetheless helped to reveal worlds otherwise hidden or unimagined. So what Mintz is saying is, sure, maybe we didn't always have a hypothesis to test and experiments to do, but if anthropologists hadn't gone there and talked to people and listened to people in the way that we did, these worlds would have never been perhaps revealed or even imagined. Right, Elvis? That was what you said. You said you were surprised by the depth. True? Yeah. Are we deep? Deep into this. Yeah. Worlds that would have never been imagined. As I said, Mintz appears later in Guest. We'll talk about him a little bit on page 88. For those of you who get crazy about citations when somebody quotes somebody else in a book and then you want to quote them, you do it like this. Mintz in Guest, page 88. So, in an ideal world, fieldwork should, as we just talked about, document the life ways, the things that might have otherwise been hidden, especially among people who might be outside of what we might call the powerful or the mainstream, or not represented in our laboratories and classrooms typically. Kat, you said you were surprised that there were pseudonyms for people.
Yeah, because I feel like I understand not wanting to like reveal their names, but I would expect it would just say, quote, anonymous, of like this tribe or whatever, so I'm surprised about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we don't in this class read an extended ethnography. So an ethnography would be, it basically means a writing about other people. It would be a book-length treatment. And oftentimes in anthropology, when you're writing this book-length treatment, you're trying to actually, like you would a novel, you're developing characters along the way, right? Or you're talking to people who recur throughout your thing. So, you know, to just call them anonymous would be, then you'd get confused along the way. I guess you could give them numbers or something. But
quoting like a city that doesn't exist?
Well, the city name though, yeah, but you'd have an imaginary name for that place all throughout the book, and a person all throughout the book. And the reason people did that is because the people that were often talking to you might be afraid of being discovered by the authorities. You know, these were often people who were, one of my professors, for example, did field work in Romania when it was a socialist country or a communist country. She later found out that she was being spied on as she was doing her field work. So although she was trying to get informed consent, which you talked about, you know, that people knew that she was doing field work, it was important not to reveal the names or perhaps disguise even the place where you were. So there are some anthropologists, and depending on the people you're studying, do reveal names and places. I felt comfortable enough that the place where I was studying, you could know the place name. I did change the names of the people involved. In an ideal world, fieldwork should also provide evidence for that thing we talked about in the last class. The last class already? Culture. How culture is something that is changing, contested, all those things. In fact, Tiana, you said we should aspire to something that Boaz wanted to do. Remember that? Bringing in Boaz, yeah. Yeah, aspiring to the cultural relativism of, I threw in Ruth Benedict too, because for me, she outlined this better than Franz Boas did, but they were buddies. They kind of had the same idea that social life is not something you can rank on a scale. And so by doing this kind of field work, it would certainly be, first of all, against these kinds of ethnocentric categories and ideas that especially were true in the 19th century, early 20th century, are probably still true today, hopefully less so, but probably so. And so that fieldwork would be against that, and hopefully we might even extend it to say that if you did your field work among people who were of a different racial category, that you would realize that the grouping of people and the idea that everybody did the same thing or had the same abilities as according to their race or as according to their culture or I mean their stage in society or were determined by these things, that fieldwork would help to document the range of variability within any given population. That it would also be a way in which you realized how, I mean, when you do fieldwork, you almost have to be a kid in relationship to the people you're studying with. And so you become dependent upon them for everything. And you quickly realize that you couldn't survive without the people you were, supposedly studying. They're actually more important than you are to your survival there. And so if you had these ideas before you went, and hopefully the process of field work would help to shake up your head about these things. And as Mint said, don't expect it to be entirely consistent. People in every society have their own beliefs and variability. And that field work is, as Guest put it, transformative. I guess that goes along with what we just said, that by doing field work, you grow in tolerance. And Alex, you used the word empathy, or maybe Guest used it. What does that word mean?
So I think we learn empathy for those around us, so it's like you begin to try to understand them, I guess, while you're there.
Yeah, empathy is kind of like sympathy, except it's a little more extreme. Like we can have sympathy for other people and their problems, but with empathy, we're trying to actually feel things from other people's perspective. Now, you never can do that totally, but that's kind of one of the goals of it. Yes, Jim.
In an anthropological sense, it's sort of tolerating or accepting a certain behavior or culture and sort of understanding why and how that can continue to, I guess, survive and be accepted by, I guess, outside of that culture.
I think so. think that's part of the goal, right? To try and understand people's views from their own point of view.
Have a tolerance of the differences between two groups.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess I was imagining that you were about to ask me a different question, which is, what if you're studying people who are mean to another group of people? Should you have empathy and tolerance for people who are intolerant? And to that, I would say, the purpose of fieldwork is not necessarily to accept what people have, but at least you should understand their reasons for doing that. And their reasons for that, even if we don't ultimately accept that and may disagree with that, we at least want to understand what's going on from inside. So yeah, I mean, and hopefully that makes you as the field worker more empathetic. And hopefully, well, Shaylin, it's not just transformative for you. Who else might it be transformative for?
The cultures themselves,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if we're gonna.
or for like just for like cultures in general, like understanding, having someone going in and like deeply studying a culture, and then they mentioned in the book a few times that it's like important for anthropologists to also communicate that effectively to like other people and other cultures, try to share that that understanding their culture, so it can change other people's perspective who maybe just might be reading an article, might be looking into the study.
Yeah, I mean, an anthropologist can never, they can't ever be neutral. And the only way that you can be an anthropologist is by talking to people and having a dialogue with people and accepting that what they say might be important. And you hope that in some ways you can also talk, I mean, you're not just a recording device, you're also, trying to figure out what's going on. Now, of course, we're not, the goal is not to radically change people, but many people have written about this. I mean, even sometimes people who have been involved with anthropologists have talked about that involvement and how it brought a different perspective on their own life as well. So, it's always, I mean, you want to be ethical, and this is always something that you have to be careful with, but it's not unusual. It shouldn't be necessarily avoided, let's say. And so, of course, this is what we call participant observation. So you're trying to be a participant. You're not, though, trying to lose that observer status. You're not trying to fully become or be so immersed that you've lost that. You're also an observer, and you can never be fully participating. One of my favorite phrases for how to do this comes from an anthropologist named Tim Ingold, who says that we shouldn't be studying people, we are studying with people. And so you are learning with them, from them. And like I said, it does often involve backing away from your own presuppositions and making yourself more childlike, you might say, in a different society. Or as Guess puts it, it begins with people. So you start not necessarily with this abstract scientific question, but with people and their concerns and their needs. Lisa, you used a word for these people, which anthropologists sometimes use, although some people get nervous when they use this word. Remember that? Key informants. Yeah, who are those people?
People who have like an inside group that you get close to, and they might give you like feedback or like telling you like what to do, or introduce you to community members and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, some people get a little nervous with this word informant. It sort of sounds like somebody's telling on you, or, like a person who's an informant is usually, that's kind of like a criminal investigation. You're collecting informants, but it's supposed to be, you might say, key colleagues or key people in your field site. And really, I mean, going back to the notion of using just a few names, most anthropologists develop a relationship with just a few people in the field, and it's an extended relationship with a number of people. In some cases, in the case of Mintz, he had a super key informant, Tasso, who he later wrote his life history, who basically helped him do his field work, who went around and talked to people and made maps of his town and kinds of things. And oftentimes during field work, you're talking to people who are knowledgeable, but then you also want to add on sort of a broad, you might say, a survey approach. So during my own field work, I got super close to probably about a dozen people who I was very friends with. But then towards the end, I'm thinking, hey, are these dozen people representative of the people I'm with, or are they simply the dozen people that are nice to me? So at that point, I did what is more known to do in perhaps like sociology. I did a random sample survey where I got a map of the whole town and basically picked out areas and talked to about 200 people to try and figure out some of the questions that I had, but to get a more broad sense of what was going on in this town. So kind of the interaction between that personal flavor and trying to get a larger sense is something that anthropologists are always trying to do. Yeah.
I think if possible, it's probably best to find an informant that like has experience of both cultures to explain like nuances and stuff that you don't understand. And like locals wouldn't really feel a need to explain it, so they wouldn't.
Yeah, often the people who you end up with are people who have gone to different places already and understand that experience and can and they may even help you with translation and stuff like that because they've been elsewhere. So yeah, that's a good point. There's a film that many anthropologists like to show in class to illustrate doing anthropology. Don't worry, it's only about 8 minutes long. Classes ago, this time a week ago, I think it was, we discussed how we had just received the culture tool, the idea of learned behavior, and that people share and contest learned behavior. And now we get our next tool, the fieldwork tool, immersing yourself in another place, talking to people, helping them make cheese. So, like I asked in 2 classes ago, how happy and excited are you to get the fieldwork tool? Amy gave me another thumbs up, but in the first class, in the culture tool, you gave me a 5.3 out of 10. What would you say about the fieldwork tool? 5.31. Barely above 5.3. Anybody else want to chime in? 7.5. There you go. We're above the very highest number that we got for culture, which was a 7, though that was a suspicious number. But we're up to a 7.5. Anybody want to go higher? Anybody want to go lower? Anybody want to give it a thumbs down? Yeah. I agree. Well, I thought actually you'd go higher than a 7.5, certainly higher than a 5.31. I think fieldwork still has a certain kind of yay. I really want to do that. Whereas culture, like I said, that's been around. I mean, fieldwork has been around for a long time too, but I think it still has that. I don't know. People like to imagine themselves doing it. It seems more fun than talking about culture. But anyway, I'll take 5.31 and 7.5. That's more than 5.3. In anthropology, as we talked about, it took a little bit of time to get fieldwork instituted as something that anthropologists did. Before Malinowski, for example, many people were simply in the classroom or in their offices, in their libraries, and they wouldn't go out as much. But over time, things became there was a kind of idea that to get a degree in cultural anthropology, that you had to go out by yourself as one fieldworker and go to one place, one town or one village, and stay there for 1 year. And then you could come back, write it up, and talk about it. And so some people call this the Fieldwork Trilogy, or these 3 parts: one fieldworker, one village, 1 year. What would be the advantage to being a solo fieldworker out there, the one fieldworker? Joseph.
If you bring too many people with you, it could sort of still keep you isolated from the people you're studying. It can sort of put you in this little bubble with your own group that you don't really go out of very often.
The bubble with your own group. Yes. Kind of like when you go to Portugal on a J-term abroad and you only hang out with people there in your bubble. Yeah, this happens to people when they go abroad. So in some ways, being a one person, you have to, you're forced to be immersed in that place. How about only staying? I'm not sure. How about we'll call a village of, does anybody live in a village? There are villages in New York State, official villages. Anybody come from a village? No. All right, we'll call a village a little place of, say, 400 people. What would be the advantage of choosing one village? What's the advantage of village size? Yeah, Paige. Your school is in a village. Yeah, so that I think was the idea, that in this a limited amount of time, that you could go around and meet everybody in the village. I'm not sure what New York officially calls a village. It always makes me laugh when I drive through a village, but yeah, so 300 people, it's people that have been with each other all their lives. They all know each other. If you can know a couple of them, you'll probably get introduced to everybody. There's not it's manageable. And I think this one you may maybe 100 years ago, this was more true than today, but anthropology was seen as this new budding academic discipline. And the idea was that we got to get out there and we got to send people to all these different places fast. And so it seemed like there were only a few anthropologists and there were so many places in the world to go that you'd only want to go to one place and report back from there. And then somebody else would go to this other place and report back from there so that you could cover the world. Now there's probably realize that isn't going to work. Yeah.
I mean, until about 150 years ago, a mass majority of people didn't live in cities or towns. They lived in villages.
Yeah, I mean, I think the world was
much more sense to sort of do field work in a village rather than a city, because most people lived in villages.
Yeah, we've passed a kind of urbanization tipping point, and that does have implications for the way we live and the way we do things. But certainly in this stage, it probably was, demographically speaking, most people lived in these kinds of circumstances, and fewer people lived in cities. What about the year? One year. What happens in a year in a village? Think.
I don't know, I mean, I guess you could be there for like fall harvesting seasons and like every festival, all of that, but also I guess it only being a year would probably make the visa easier.
Yeah, it probably helps with the, you don't have to stay that long. But yeah, there was this idea kind of giving you that little wheat field there as a cue, right? And I mean, I'm not sure how much this idea actually applied to all parts of the world. It was in some ways a kind of European and North American idea that if you lived there a year, you'd go through the planting, and then you'd go through the growing, and then you'd go through the harvest, then you'd experience the harvest festival, and then all these things kind of had this cyclical rotation where every year you had Thanksgiving, the same way that we typically think about our year, that you go through this seasonal cycle. Yeah.
Birth and also.
Yeah, you would probably be there enough that you'd see some of those things happen, right? So, I mean, in some ways there was always going to be a serendipitous aspect or a by chance, but you're hoping to catch some of those things, and you can see how they, maybe you can catch a few births so that how that varies over time. Like I said, I think this is somewhat of an assumption from the certain kinds of climates. Certainly where I did field work was more on the equator, but high in the mountains. And so there wasn't that same seasonality, and people would be planting crops all the time. But some of the festivals were certainly annual. Amy, what else might you have to do if you're going to be there for a year? You have to talk to people. You're probably going to at least get some language. So you might not be able to, you might not be able to study that particular language or that particular version of the language before you go away. And you may rely on intermediaries and to some extent interpreters, but you're hoping to go beyond. You're hoping to at least get some language, if not a form of fluency. And so, I think these were the things that people liked about this and why it became kind of the standard for anthropological fieldwork at the time. People were like, all right, I'll go out, do my 7.5 fieldwork. But I think it's also important to talk about the things that fieldwork, doing this kinds of fieldwork trilogy, what you might not see, what you might be less able to apprehend from this. So I think obviously if you are a single field worker, you're also going to have one perspective on things. And when I did some follow-up field work about 7 years after my original one, and I actually worked with another field worker, another anthropologist, and I was quite surprised at how when we would observe similar events or even talk to the same person, we'd come out with different ideas about what happened there. And so, sometimes when you're just one person, it can be pretty limiting. Trina, you mentioned something else that might be very limiting in some societies about where you're able to go. You're a field worker. What might limit you in terms of who you can talk to?
Like the way you present yourself, or even like your physical appearance. So it might, like, depending on who it is, make the people feel uncomfortable talking to you about certain things that you might not understand.
Yeah, might be made uncomfortable. Right, Louisa? What might make people uncomfortable about you?
What
how you could not connect with other people as well, depending on like just your age or your gender, or that's what they said. That's what Guest said in the book. Like you might not connect as well with people depending on who you are. Even.
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned a bunch of things like nationality, and those things can be important. But I actually think, to me at least, the gender thing is something that is always striking to me, because in almost every society, you go and there's just certain places where if you're an outsider, you can range around and do different things, but they'll be like, no men come here. And it's like, you're kind of, or you slip into that without knowing that you've slipped into it. You kind of slide into a gender role and you just never talk to the other people. And that's just, again, it's not that everybody, in fact, you might say we're sort of particularly dual or binary in our gender, but in many societies there is this idea that only men do this or only women do this, and so some anthropologists have complained that they couldn't get access to anything except the women and children, whereas other books were written that seemed to be almost from the perspective of the sort of male village elders, and like they never talked to anybody who was actually doing the cooking. So this could, is something that you have to be aware of, and you have to try and get beyond. Of course, with one village, as some of you mentioned, it's hard to see the larger society. So if you're just in one village and they're the people who've always grown up there, you don't see those interconnections that are there, but are often not discussed. And this might sound weird, especially for you people who grew up in small towns and villages. But the other thing you're going to miss are the people who have left the village. And this has been happening for hundreds of years in human societies. People have been leaving their hometowns. And so oftentimes the people who are still in their hometowns are the people who are kind of maybe stuck there. How many of you are longing to go back to your hometown as soon as you're done with college? The urban people. Yeah, but the rest of us are trying to get out of where we came from and leave and go do something else, right? So this happens too in other societies as well, that people leave, they go to work somewhere, they migrate, they immigrate. And along with that, it's often difficult to see those outside influences, especially if people only occasionally come from where they are. So they might be sending things back, but it's sometimes difficult to see this. Elvis, if you're there for a year, what else might you miss? Yeah, I'm there for a year. I come back and tell you that I know all about these people I've been through all their festivals one time. What am I missing though? Now, you're probably missing the whole way this happened, right? The historical stuff. And people I don't know if this happens to you, but once people get into a routine, it only takes 2 or 3 years and people will tell you that that's how it's always been. And we always did it this way. At least in my family, I'll go do something, we'll do it for 2 years and we'll say, yeah, like we always do. It wasn't that long ago we didn't have Christmas this way, but now you're telling me we have to cook this thing? Okay, Dad. All right. You have it your way. Yeah.
Besides our history, you're kind of also missing like the future, in the sense that you're not really seeing how their culture is shifting over a long period of time. Like cultures aren't stagnant. They don't just stay the same way. So you're not really seeing how it's changing and how it's going to maybe be different in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you come back and then you take another 7 or 8 years to write your book. And then you put your book out there. And by that time, it might be different. But for all your readers, it's like, there they are. There are the Hartwick College people. That's how they are. And then you just read that for years and years, and you don't realize that Hartwick College might have changed over time. Yeah, so you don't, you get a slice, but you don't see that. It's especially hard, I think, it's hard to understand history. It might be especially hard in a society where, let's say you wanted to know what the history was. Let's say you wanted to look in the archives. Are there even there? Has anybody even written about this? Are things there written down? In some cases, they might even be in a different language than the people you were talking to. We had an interesting anthropologist come here, and he had grown up in the country where people would go to study the people in the Kalahari. So, and what he said is he was able to understand some of the historical stuff because all the archives were in German, because this place was a German colony, but none of the anthropologists spoke German, so they couldn't read this stuff. So, this is a hugely important aspect you might be missing. The other thing that is easy to not get is the ways in which people are connected to the rest of the world. And one of the reasons for that is just the way that people trade things around is people actually surprisingly adopt things fairly quickly. So within about 50 years of the interchange of the time that the Americas and the Europeans and Africa came together, they were already growing corn in much of Africa. Corn, of course, or maize, comes to us from the Americas, but it spread rapidly around. If you talk to people today, if you talk to Italians today about the tomato, it would probably be seen as an essential Italian thing. Hard to imagine Italian food without tomatoes, at least for me. But we know there were never tomatoes because tomatoes come to us from what is now Mexico, that area of the world. So there couldn't have been tomatoes in Italy 500, 600 years ago, but now it seems like a bedrock thing. Oh, as is polenta, which is a corn-based food that the northern Italians, where I came from, ate so much of that they ended up being malnourished because you're supposed to eat corn with other things like beans, but they just saw it as the cheap food to eat. Potatoes, of course, come from the Americas and spread around so fast. And in the same way, horses were acquired by indigenous people, some of them probably stolen from the Spanish, but pre-Columbian indigenous societies in the Americas didn't have horses. But they quickly adopted them and got better at riding them than the Spaniards were, probably. So that by this time people showed up in the west of the United States, the horse was fully integrated into indigenous society. And it's also, it's also the fact that they didn't, the way these things got traded is you would trade a horse and then you'd sell it along the way or trade it up for a thing. And so the person you got the horse from wasn't a Spaniard. It was like your next door neighbor. And they're like, hey, look at this cool thing I got. But you had no idea of where it came from. And the next thing you know, you're excited about it. And same thing with tobacco, horses. All these things move without kind of being culturally connected, and they quickly lose that and get adapted and adopted into the local community.
It sort of reminds me of the documentary I saw about a year ago about African zoology and how some cultures and tribes, particularly in the Congo of Africa, actually want some basically pseudo-anthropologists to come there because it's free tourism. Anthropologists don't really understand that So basically that crypto creature that these pseudo-anthropologists are looking for is called Mukili Mbembe, which doesn't actually mean anything in the Congo language, but they think they're going to go out here and find what is essentially a dinosaur that doesn't actually exist. But these tribes in the Congo will lie to them and say, yeah, I saw it, just to get them to come there because it's free tourism and it's free money. So the anthropologists don't really understand that these people have TVs. They know what a dinosaur is. They have, you know, a full understanding of the world around them.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to talk about this idea that, you know, there's often a kind of a vision of anthropology that says that we study the isolated and looking. Yeah, so exactly, but you know, that's the idea, right? I mean, it still remains in the public imagination that we can do this, which is a good way of talking about the biggest danger, I think, and we've talked about this a little bit, the biggest danger of doing this 1 year of anthropological field work and coming back. Paris, what do you say the biggest danger is of anthropological fieldwork? The biggest limitation, the worst thing an anthropologist can do. Well, no, I don't know if it's the worst. I'm sure they can do worse than what you're about to, but what's the worst part of doing field work and coming back and talking or writing about it? What's the danger there?
But they were just talking about how they make it. Okay, wait, it's like how they like get information from like what they studied, or sometimes they like make it into I don't want to sound stupid, but they like make it into their own words. No, not their own words.
Yeah, no, you're on the right track.
False information, or they're like kind of make assumptions based on what they see, and then they go and report that back on that.
And that's, yeah. So the big danger here is that, you know, we've talked about this. Might not know the history, you might not know the future. The big danger is to assume that in your 1 year of field work and with the 12 people that you talk to, that's all you need to know about the people. And that then you can write a book about them called the Nacirema, Superstition and Body Ritual. Now, for those of you who might have missed that class and missed the Nacirema article, remember that's American spelled backward, and it was supposed to be a kind of, but imagine that Horace Minor had written a book about the Americans and basically said, this is all you need to know. I got it. This is what you need to know. And so, you know, it was the problem or the issue of that Fieldwork Trilogy is that many of the books that were written, what we call ethnographies, were basically describing a group of people as if they were this people kind of locked in time and locked in their customs and locked in their festivals. And it just became, okay, well, this is the Hartwick College people, this is the Balinese, this is the Indonesian way, without what we want to know, or what we hope we know, is that there's variation and contradictions within any society, that people contest or challenge that culture is changing. And those things are more difficult to know if you only have a relatively brief amount of time. I mean, a year is a long time, but it's also a short time. The other issue with this is that field work basically became the way to get a job. So if you went and did your studies, then you did your year, and then you did your write-up, then you're like, aha, I'm ready to teach. And then, so instead of trying to, you know, kind of figure out what was going on with people, it was rare that anthropologists would do field work after that. And so this results in something that Josie was talking about, is that the image of anthropology is still that, you know, we do, that anthropology studies people that are isolated, exotic, or as PJ put it, thousands of miles away. If you haven't gone 1,000 miles away, you're not doing anthropology yet, right? So that's the idea. And I think that's pretty cemented in the public mind. I don't think that's gone away. The idea that you have to be far away. If an anthropologist came to us and said, hey, I'm an anthropologist, I'm doing a study, can you help me out? That you'd be like, nah, you're not, no, that can't be right. Has anybody ever done that to you? Everybody ever come up to you and said, I'm an anthropologist, can you help me out with my study? Yeah, no. There's a little bit of power involved there too, because it's usually, the people who take anthropology classes in college and they go thousands of miles away to where people have, other things to do, but they'll talk to you for a while. Many, perhaps most anthropologists are now trying to go beyond that idea of a fieldwork trilogy. So, I talked about Sidney Mintz, and one of his team members on the people of Puerto Rico was one of my favorite anthropologists named Eric Wolf, who later wrote a book about how people are interconnected. But that was their point, is that you cannot study a local society, you cannot study just a village in Puerto Rico without understanding the global and context of those influences. And so this came to us from the 1960s and 1970s, but it's still something that anthropologists try to do today. Yes, mentions the work of Annette Weiner, who went back to Malinowski's field site in the Trobriand Islands after, 70 or 80 years that he'd been there, and talked to different people and found out that Malinowski did some good things, did some good field work, but also missed all kinds of things. Not surprisingly, there were all sorts of gendered areas of life that he didn't tell us anything about. And so this was kind of a way of being reflexive, or a way of thinking about life from a different perspective. And then he also discusses Barbara Myerhoff's work, who was one among, I would say, several anthropologists who would study in their own society. So in today's world, we have to think about global issues, the ways in which any society is embedded in a larger context. There's a huge issue which we should have been paying attention to all along, but we definitely need to be paying attention to it now. We have to be where people are. Louisa, where are the people now?
Online.
They're online. And so you might be in your village or your town, but you probably should be on Facebook too. At least my people that I studied with, they're all on Facebook. I know you're not on Facebook, but they love Facebook. So that's where I am if I'm doing field work. You should be there too. I know you should, yeah, so you might have to be on TikTok. You should also talk to people though. I think if you're only on TikTok, that might not be good enough, but it's important to be doing what the people are. If they're on TikTok, be on TikTok. I also think that whoever you are, be a feminist. If you're going to be an anthropologist, you better be a feminist. So you better at least think about that. You better think about things from different perspectives. If not, just don't even do it. You have to get all perspectives, and so that might mean that. And be reflexive, which means think about your own position. think about your own identity and how people might be reacting to you because of that identity. Now, on the one hand, we have to get out of the idea that anthropologists only go to these places that are thousands of miles away and exotic and isolated. And anthropologists in general now realize that this is true. We shouldn't do that. On the other hand, I think it is still important that anthropologists go where other people are not going. And so, you know, sometimes anthropologists perhaps want to get too comfortable. You might say, I'm just going to study my own home here. I don't want to go anywhere. And as Mintz and others have pointed out, there's a lot of places that still need to be, people need to go. And so, you know, they may not have the dinosaurs there, but at least you should talk to them about their lives in today's world. Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of groups of people within our own society that aren't being studied, that aren't thousands of miles away. I mean, like homeless people, for example.
Absolutely. So, you know, you don't have to, you probably don't have to go very far to find people that are completely ignored by our larger society. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, one of the things that does worry me is that, you know, I mean, I think that people still want to read about the strange people, and they still don't consider it anthropology if you're not doing somebody that's exotic or weird. And so on the one hand, there's the public image of anthropology, but I will also say that still to this day, getting a PhD in anthropology is still too white and too male. And I don't know if that's going to change. Maybe it will, but we haven't perhaps helped ourselves out in the PhD level of anthropology. Our undergraduate classrooms are more diverse than they used to be. But at the graduate level, people are going on to do this. It's, you know, it's hard.